Hello, everybody. This is Craig from the Pacific War Channel, but this is going to be soon called, just to remind people, the Echoes of War podcast. We're just going to be in a long transitional period, but just to keep that going up so not everybody is surprised later on when all of a sudden, like the logo changes, the title changes and such. Don't want to lose all you guys. But of course, I'm joined here by my co-host, Gaurav. How are you?
Hey Greg, wonderful to be here on the Pacific War podcast slash Echoes of War
Yeah,
podcast.
exactly. Got to keep drilling that for a few weeks before we get all this up and running. But before we jump into it, I just want to say to everybody, if you want to, further support me and my channel, the best way to do so is to either join my YouTube membership over at the Pacific War Channel on YouTube, or you can join my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. They're completely identical. They cost the exact same. And at a minimum, if you join either, you get access to the exclusive podcast, which is about 25 plus episodes and ongoing. You get early access to all of the content I make, and you get voting rights for the subjects I'll tackle next. I'll add, if you do decide to join the YouTube membership, you get a bit of a bonus because I have a bunch of unlisted episodes there, which includes podcasts, mind you. They're a little goofy, they're a little all over the place, but they're there. So there is, I guess, an incentive to join the YouTube membership. But stating all of that, this is going to be part two in a kind of a mini series we're doing. It's not covering the entire Second Punic War because that would be insane. We would literally be doing more than 10 episodes because there's a bunch of theaters. But as we saw in the first episode, which was the ascent of Hannibal, this episode is going to be focusing on the response after the devastation of Cannae, and of course, the rise of a new figure, Scipio Africanus, or Scipio Africanus for those. You can say either. As I'm told by multiple other podcasts, apparently you could pronounce it either which way. I don't know if a historian's going to come after me for that one. But yeah.
Well, yeah, just to reinforce that, it is just that this is the journey of reaching their apex of their military careers of the two greatest generals of the war, who were heads and
Yeah.
shoulders above everyone. And they do converge at the final decisive battle of Zama, which would be our conclusion. So
Yeah.
it made sense to go down this route of one side on for Hannibal and the Carthaginians, and now we look at Rome.
Of course. And I guess to start this one off, maybe you want to just talk a little bit about the repercussions of what happened at Cannae, kind of the the response of the Romans to it.
I think I would like let's start off with a little bit of Scipio's
Okay,
young career so far.
sure.
Granted, by the Roman standards, right, he was too young to take any command, but Svan had quite a bit in him, and we will see it when we discuss a bit of his early life. Because in some of the battles that we discussed, which was definitely the Battle of the Ticinus, maybe Trasimene, or sorry, the Trebia and Cannae. He was a young officer in those armies.
Sure. Actually, I can pitch in just to talk a little bit about the brief amount of knowledge we have of his early life. So, Scipio Africanus was born as Publius Cornelius Scipio in 236 BC to his father, who, of course, has the exact same name, which will confuse people. And anyone who knows their, Roman Republican history, it's like this in most of the families. His mother was Pomponia, as part of the prominent Corneli Scipiones. Actually, I'm not sure if that's pronounced like that. Corneli Scipiones. I probably mispronounced that, but it was a very prestigious family back in the day. You could think of them as an aristocracy. This influential,
I'll just add just this one small thing. There were like these old patrician elite
oh yeah, of course,
families that continue to serve,
yeah,
and the Scipios were one of these families. So their only job in Rome was pretty much being senators and leading the Roman politics.
yeah, of course. They're
And
very, very
and
influential. Yeah,
and yeah, you did have one of his ancestors lead the fleet, the first Roman fleet, to a disaster, the famous Scipio Asina. So,
yeah.
but I don't think it really dented the family's prestige too much.
But as you allude to, it's a very influential patrician family, and they actually recently held multiple consulships. So his great grandfather, Lucius Cornelius Scipio Barbatus, and his grandfather, Lucius Cornelius Scipio, had both served as consuls and censors. His father held consulship in 218, and his uncle served as consul in 222 BC. his mother's brother, Manius Pomponius Matho, and Marcus Pomponius Matho both held consulships in 233 and 231 BC, respectively. So you're looking at kind of, and I guess to like bring it to today's standards, you're looking at kind of like a, it sounds awful to say it's a Clinton family, like, or a Kennedy family. That's much better. Yeah, makes more sense.
Okay, I'm sorry. Like, I think I prefer the second example.
Yeah, yeah. No,
I'm just gonna
I
have to leave
mean,
it there.
of course, the Scipios were killing people politically, but not to go down that rabbit hole. But they're like the Kennedys or the Rockefellers, something like that. Prestigious,
Yeah,
very
I
old
think like
family,
just
old wealth.
yeah, and they can trace. These are the families that could trace their ancestry to the
Oh yeah.
old kingdom of Rome. So this is a family that's going back many centuries.
Which is extremely important in the Roman Republic. It's not so much so in the Empire, but in the Republic, it's everything is about the, former imperium that was held, whose families were who, to keep the legacy going. In Dan Carlin's podcast on Death Throes of the Republic, he famously talked about Julius Caesar and how in his daily life, his upbringing as a kid to a teenager, he would, walk through his house and he would see the sculptures of his ancestors. And it's like it's thrown into your face. Like you have to succeed them. You have to, keep the family name going, basically. So all these old patrician families, it's do or die, basically. They have to do this. And I guess I'll go into a little bit about his marriages and family. Scipio married Aemilia Tartaria, the daughter of the consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus, who was killed at Cannae. And the Battle of Cannae is going to have a lot to do with this episode, by the way, and a lot to do with Scipio and what happens with him. She was also the sister of Lucius Aemilius Paulus Macedonicus, another consul. Scipio and Aemilia, they had a productive marriage and they were blessed with a lot of kids. They had about, I think it was like three sons and two daughters who will go on to do other things. The Scipio legacy is actually, it's going to go on for a long time.
I'm quite. I just remember that he was related to Paulus, and just a small spoiler. He's the man that permanently would break the power of Macedonia in the future.
Yeah. I mean, like for example, he had two daughters who were both named Cornelia because the Romans had
That's
only
the
a few
Roman way.
names to
That's the
pick from.
Roman way.
Yeah, only a handful of names for everybody. The elder daughter married Publius Cornelius Scipio Nasica Corcolium, while the younger married Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus. Yes, that
Whew.
name, becoming the mother of the famous Gracchi brothers, so Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. So, like, you're already seeing very famous figures are going to come through this family bloodline. None of his sons had legitimate heirs. However, his son Publius adopted the son of Lucius Aemilius Paulus Macedonius, who would become Scipio Aemilianus. I'm sorry if I mispronounced some of these names. I'm terrible.
He's also given the title Africanus, but
Yeah.
it's kind of Scipio Africanus is to the hero of today's story,
Yes.
and Aemilianus is how we distinguish his adopted son.
Hmm. Um, to talk a little bit about the man himself, like how, for example, how the Romans saw Scipio. He was considered a man of great intelligence and culture. He was fluent in Greek, and even writing his memoirs, he wrote in the Greek language. He was credited with introducing the clean-shaven look to Rome, which was inspired by Alexander the Great, replacing the traditional beard. This trend lasted until Emperor Hadrian's reign, and we're talking a lot longer, into the empire. But it would be revived later by Constantine the Great. So the beards would come back as, fashion goes up and down. Uh, Other than the beards, Scipio was also renowned for kind of his eloquence. He was a very persuasive orator, and he's a very confident man. And he seemed to have a sense of fairness, which has its own thing in Rome. You always have to put your mindset into what it was like to be a Roman back then. They do not have the same mindset as us today. Um, he could be considered quite harsh and arrogant towards his political adversaries, but he was also known to be gracious and sympathetic towards others. He really admired Greek culture, and he had an unconventional way of wearing his Roman toga, which actually would spark a lot of opposition from Roman senators, particularly Cato the Elder, who's one of my favorite figures in history, by the way, who saw, Greek influence as a
It is, in
direct
my
threat.
opinion, Carthage must be destroyed.
Exactly. And of course, it's Cato the Elder. He's the champion of like an old Rome that may or may not have ever existed, but he's bringing it back, and he saw it as a threat to like Roman values and culture. So there's kind of a dichotomy between the two, whereas one is seen as too Greek, too influenced by that world, and the other one's more Roman. Cato, of course, he's a loyalist to Fabius Maximus, and he had spent a lot of time in Sicily as a inquisitor and investigator of allegations of military misconduct against Scipio and stuff. There's a background between these two guys, but anyways. Um, this what else to talk about when it comes to Scipio? Scipio was, of course, being the day and age, religion was really important. He often would visit the temple of Jupiter to make offerings. It was widely believed that he had a special connection to the gods, and I mean, any great military commander in the Roman Republic, if they do well enough, somehow they link themselves to the gods in some way. That's just what they do. Some believed he even talked to Jupiter. He himself, he might have genuinely believed he had a connection to the gods. I mean, it's a similar situation with like, look at Alexander the Great, for example. His mom fed him all these things about how he was like the son of so and so, and like he
Zeus
actually,
and
yeah,
Ammon.
yeah, and he actually believed it. Um, but this belief in divine favor persisted throughout his career because he was one of the most successful generals of all time, I'd say. Um, in addition to, his military and political roles, Scipio was also a priest of Mars, known for, doing spiritual incantations with that. What else to say about him? He, if you were to kind of like place him in a category of generalship, I'd call him someone who was pretty careful with his planning, very rational. Like he tried to outthink his opponents. He I don't know if you'd say he was overly aggressive. I wouldn't call him an overly aggressive general by any means. He was just very calculated. I don't know what else really to say about him.
He I wouldn't use that term as well, but he did have a tendency where he was sometimes unable to fully exploit his victories in
Yeah.
the aftermath, but definitely very unconventional. And that actually won him a lot of success, as we will discuss later in this episode. And while to his political opponents, especially the old aristocracy of Rome, he appears rash and you know just a reckless young man. It just completely belies the careful attention to detail he makes in his plans and how he acts, what he's used for the intelligence and everything. It's quite similar, I would say, to how Alexander the Great was also viewed by some of Philip's old generals.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
He, so there's that similarity between them.
I mean, and he's living within the vacuum of an extremely unconventional time for Rome because Rome is facing an adversary that is beating them on their own terms, and they don't, well, except for of course the Fabius strategy, they don't understand how to face this enemy. And a lot of the people in the Senate, of course, are falling victim to that. Whereas, Scipio, maybe he sees something. I don't know, from this point on, would you like to now start dabbling into
Sure.
yeah,
Let me just give a little bit of the brief history of how he was until the Battle of Cannae.
yeah,
And
sure.
there's not really much to say because at his age, so I think at the Battle of the Ticinus, he would have been just 18 years old. So by the Roman system, he was nothing more than a tribune.
Hmm.
Undoubtedly, a very important tribune given the fact he was serving on his father's staff. And it is said when his father was injured in the Battle of the Ticinus, where Hannibal's 6,000 cavalrymen just smashed the ragtag motley crew that his father raised together. I can't use Publius Cornelius Scipio since I'm going to refer to those. Uh, we see the young Scipio and his few Roman soldiers hack their way through the Numidian and Hispanic cavalry, and they get the consul out safely. He's injured, so cannot take field command, but he's saved it. Now, whether he takes part in the next battle at uh, I think at the, I just keep mixing up the names, you know. Sorry, at the Trebia. I don't know, I just always mix up the order of Trasimene and Trebia. It is not known whether he participated, but there was a good chance he would have, given the fact that Sempronius Longus and Scipio merged whatever forces they had in northern Italy. And while he was not present during the battles of 217 BC, which included Lake Trasimene, he was a young officer in 216 BC at the Battle of Cannae. I'm pretty sure would have been taken on to the staff of the consul, Paulus, since this man is his son-in-law. And the Romans had this thing of that very much, the client-patron family relationships.
Of course.
So he was there. And so this is the second example of where he sees Hannibal's mastery of using combined arms tactics, where the infantry, cavalry, skirmishers, the light infantry, heavy infantry, flanking, encirclement, these are concepts that are, in all honesty, alien to the Romans. He's observing and learning. And if you had to get a teacher at that time for this, I think he's learning from the best that ever was at that time. And so in the aftermath of Cannae, as we know, about 13 to 14,000 men returned to Rome. This is including 10,000 soldiers who were not engaged in combat. They were like a garrison left.
Yeah.
So he was, however, in that group of 4,000 men that broke away from the battle, the rest being killed or captured. Not wounded, just killed or captured. Most of them killed.
Yeah.
And now let's just see and last time we talked a little bit about what Rome was like after Cannae. I think let's just recollect that, and let's look at Rome's response as well here. So after Cannae, when the men come, there is a state of utter hysteria and panic, and quite understandably so. This is an army that the Romans thought would be invincible, and it was annihilated. And they are completely demoralized. So many of the nobility have fallen in the last 3 campaigning seasons. It was even declared there was a day of mourning because there was not a single Roman who was related through either marriage or friendship to one of the dead.
It's insane. The level of this massacre, it's
It,
unprecedented.
it was. And there was even a few instances of human sacrifices apparently being made as well
Oh, yeah.
to appease the gods. And again, you can't really blame the Romans for the panic. They've already heard 3 to 4 major defeats in the last few years from Hannibal. And now you have this utter annihilation. They think he's just going to come up and take the city by force. Now, this is where, and let me just put some statistics to this. Over the last 20 months, around 1/5, 150,000 Roman soldiers. So this is not even counting your Italian and mercenaries have been killed. Not wounded, not captured, killed. This is 20% of the adult male population. And in a time where, there were not that many people on this planet at that time, and only those who could furnish their own equipment were allowed to join the army. This is a massive manpower blow. On top of that, the Roman bridgehead in Hispania, north of the Ebro River, is just minuscule. Carthage is dominating North Africa. They have a good chunk of Hispania under their control. Corsica, Sardinia have revolted against Roman rule. Sicily, which is under the command of Syracuse and Rome. Well, Syracuse and Sicily are like, yep, I think we know where this is going, and they are also defecting to the Carthaginian side. Rome has been dealing with the pirates from Illyria for quite a while as well. And these guys are amping up their attacks since Rome doesn't have the manpower to spare. And more crucially, we also see the Kingdom of Macedonia declare war on Rome in a more opportunistic sense rather
Of
than
course.
any animosity towards Rome, because at this time, Rome controlled a few ports in Greece which Philip V of Macedon wanted. And I also forgot, most of Italy has now defected to Carthage. Northern Italy, which had just been conquered over the last decade or so by the Romans, they were the first to go. And southern Italy fully defects to Hannibal. This is including the city of Capua, which is the second largest city in the peninsula. And these are also areas that traditionally housed a lot of Roman enemies, including the Samnites and the southern tip of Italy, where we would see on the Italian boot, the area that used to be called Magna Graecia. They were also fairly recently conquered, about 60, 70 years ago. They also broke away. So if you could just imagine just a small part of central Italy, like, just that area around central Italy and Rome. That's all that is fully loyal to Rome. That's it. They have, and this is not, and they've also suffered immense manpower losses. And their response is what really is, it's amazing. It's scary, but amazing, but shows their resolve.
Yep.
Hannibal sent a peace offer to Rome. He did not ever march on Rome. And I know there he gets a lot of stick for not marching on Rome, but given the primitive nature of siege warfare at this time, it was 100% the correct decision. He did not have the manpower.
I could
But
could he have starved Rome out? That's the only thing I could think of. But even that, like, they would be able to get supplies from the sea, and no, there's no way to
they
defeat Rome.
no, let's just put it like this: he had a much larger force at Saguntum. That took 8 months, and Saguntum had a smaller garrison.
True. Yeah.
I think I'll just leave it there. But a few days after this morning, the Romans start to really take measures in a very harsh but practical way. And Fabius Maximus, the dictator, the delayer, as whoever, whatever you want to name him, he's the one that really starts to calm people down. Like, say, okay, now we take stock and we rebuild and we'll do it. And our young Scipio also played a little role. He heard some other young nobles were discussing a plan to abandon the Republic and go overseas, probably, I guess, maybe the Seleucid Empire or such, and serve as mercenary captains. And he just, with a few supporters, storms into the meeting in complete rage and forces them all at sword point to re-swear their allegiance to Jupiter and Rome. And they are not going to abandon it.
I will mention
It's,
it's this source was from Livy, and
yeah,
it's as you said, Scipio. He points it famously. He points the sword tip, and he says, "You're going to swear to Jupiter, and you're not going to give this up, and we're going to fight." And we don't find the same account later with Publius' writings, which, in my head, whenever you read such things, means that maybe it was over dramatized, or maybe it did happen. We never know with these sources.
Uh,
Yeah,
we do, but I guess that's a problem, right? Over 100 years between the various authors, things
exactly.
tend to get lost.
Yeah,
I mean, even the actual text could have been lost. I do agree, it's questionable, but it does seem akin to his character this time,
yeah.
from what we definitely know. Now, back to the Roman response. After a few days after Cannae, they start stripping the temples of the spoils of war, reduce the requirements to join the army so that young 16, 17-year-olds are also being levied. The state is providing for their equipment, which is not standard for the Romans at this time.
Definitely not.
And even debtors, so people who owe debt or are criminals, they are generally barred from serving from the armed forces. They are called in with the saying, okay, serve for us, and upon discharge, you're completely free.
French Foreign Legion style.
And within a week or so, there was a couple of legions ready to defend Rome. That's it. This was like beyond the resolve. Rome had another superpower, which we all know. It's almost limitless manpower reserves.
Yeah.
And this is a good example. By little over 5, 6 months after Cannae, it was a turn of 215 BC. Rome has mobilized 12 to 15 legions worth of soldiers across all theaters. And by 211 BC, they are maintaining a force of 25 legions across all theaters.
It's an insane comeback. Yeah.
And the main thing against Hannibal, they adopt the Fabian strategy wholeheartedly.
As they
So to
should.
kind of also and to so that's why we'll see Hannibal gets bottled up in southern Italy by now. And no Roman consul or praetor who was commanding forces against Hannibal for the next decade or so in Italy. They never had a force of more than two, maximum three legions. So that even if there's a defeat, which there were a few, because you still had a few hot-headed egos trying to think they knew better than the great general himself, and they'd get a complete thrashing.
Hmm.
It's not a big morale loss to the Romans. So as you can see, Rome will start pressing the offensive at every juncture. Now, Scipio will not serve in Italy anymore.
Hmm.
He spends a couple of years in politics, but his conduct and bravery, which have been noted by the Romans in the previous years, lets him stand in the year 213 BC as an aedile. So this is the second step in the senatorial ladder, and it's quite unprecedented. While we see the political system break down so much more in a century or so after his death, he's a 23-year-old man taking a very important public position. There are only four aediles elected every year. And the Romans were quite gung ho about the rules being followed for this. And you had to be around 34 years old.
Hmm.
One tribune did oppose his election, but he's too popular right now that the guy withdrew his opposition. Now, this is where I think we need to start switching theaters. After his father recovered from his injury suffered at the Ticinus River, he takes some reinforcements and joins his brother, Scipio's uncle, in Hispania, where they are to fight the Carthaginians. Now, Carthage has three armies here. One under Hasdrubal, Hannibal's one of Hannibal's brothers. One under Mago, another brother of Hannibal, who was dispatched after going to North Africa to try to get reinforcements for Hannibal himself with a new army, and Gisco. Uh, that's how we'll call him, Hasdrubal Gisco, who are now leading the various Carthaginian factions. And this is also, you could see like a Barca versus Hanno fight, because Gisco is a big buddy of Hanno who does not like the Barca family. Regardless, they are pressing the offensive, and a good chunk of what we know as the Iberian Peninsula is under their control, with silver mines, farming, everything. And you're talking about each army being around 35 to 40,000 men. Now, the brothers Scipio, as I'll just collectively refer to them, arrive. They initially have some success. So you have the Battle of the Ebro River, where the Carthaginians under Hasdrubal suffer quite a big defeat and lose a good chunk of their local navy. But this is where we also see the fallings of the old Roman system. The Scipio brothers, they don't really understand reconnaissance and combined arms, and they've not really understood the locals' mentality. So most of the tribes here, they sell themselves as mercenaries. They're not loyal to either faction. If you're likely to win and more importantly, you're going to pay, they'll back you fully. If not, well, buddy, we don't care. It's business. And so I think in 216 BC, Hasdrubal gets the orders from Hannibal to kind of join him, and he starts making preparations for that. This is where we should definitely introduce Massinissa. He's a Numidian commander serving with the Carthaginians, and he's going to play a very big role towards the end. And he's considered probably one of the better, or if not the best, cavalry commander of the era. And we have this situation where, first of all, Hasdrubal will also try Cannae, but he unfortunately does not have his brother's intellect of battlefield. And yeah, the what he experienced was Cannae gone wrong, just for the Carthaginian side. And he's completely pushed onto the back foot. So this is the Battle of Detorsa, I believe. Though this time, while the only good thing that came out for him was the Romans also took a beating. So for 2 years, both sides just kind of were limited to skirmishes. The problem is, Hasdrubal at least has been in Iberia for quite a while. He knows that the locals are mercenaries; they are not loyal. And ultimately, the Romans tried to ambush the armies in two different pincers, like one led by each brother. And in the first one, Massinissa's Numidian horsemen play a big role in counter ambushing, I'll use that term, of Publius Cornelius Scipio, the father, and he is killed. And Gnaeus Scipio, his brother, who also has command here, he retreats to a hill, and in the night, most of his army leaves because they were mercenaries that he had hired, and Hasdrubal just paid them more to just desert. He's surrounded, and yeah, 211 BC, we see that the Roman position in Hispania is quite dire, to say the least. And they just have one stronghold north of the Ebro River. So they're just towards, like, I think what Ebro, if I'm not mistaken, would be towards what we call the area of Catalonia today. They just have a stronghold there. That's it. And when the news reaches Rome that the Scipii brothers, who have been empowered by the Senate, I might add, to execute the war in that theater, are dead, nobody wants to take the job. No one wants to go to Hispania and command. It's kind of like frowned upon or whatever. Except a young Scipio. He's the one who volunteered. And now there are two versions of this. It's said that the Senate did not like the choice of such a young man given the command. And they rejected him, and Scipio went to the popular assembly where he secured the vote with an overwhelming uh, approval.
Mm-hmm.
Or it was that the Senate did accept him, but given the extraordinary nature due to his age, they just had to put a formal vote just to kind of justify it.
Yeah.
So the reason I do want to stress on that is this was the year 211 BC, and Scipio Africanus right now is just 25 years old. Only praetors and consuls are generally given proconsular imperium to wage war.
Very
And
unprecedented.
by the Roman standards, you have to be at least 40 years old to be a praetor. Not even a consul, the praetor.
Mm-hmm.
Consul is 42. So you can see why it's quite an extraordinary thing at the moment.
Would you like me at
So
this point to talk about how he will change kind of the political sphere in Hispania?
um, I think let's talk a little bit after he takes the capital, like
Okay.
in his opening moves. So he does arrive at the Ebro stronghold where the Romans have retreated. And right now, with the reinforcements he got and the survivors, he has an army of around 30,000 men. So that's 30,000 infantry and 3,000 cavalry. He does actually spend the better part of the next year actually just training his men so that they kind of get used to the concept of combined arms, how to work with the light infantry better, how everyone can move, how can the cavalry move, flanking. He's not going to just stick to the standard triple X axis formation that the Romans are very famous for. He's going to improvise, and we will see this soon. And he's also willing to uh, undertake reconnaissance. And this is alien to the Romans. They don't undertake such lengthy reconnaissance. And if they do, it's just along the planned marching route. It is not to gather intelligence. And this is what he gets. He realizes uh, right now that the three Carthaginian armies are all approximately slightly larger than his. So he has about 35,000 men tops. Each of the Carthaginian forces are around the same size. He plans to defeat each in detail. And what he gets is Hadrible is near the city of Toledo fighting some locals. Uh, Gisco is in Portugal fighting another set of locals. And Mago and his army, they are near the Straits of Gibraltar at like the Pillars of Hercules. All these armies are separated, but crucially, he's going for Carthago Nova, the capital of the region. And each of those armies are at least a 10 days march away. He has time. He moves on in secrecy from along the eastern coast of Spain and lands up at the gates of Carthago Nova, completely startling the defenders. Now, the city is quite well selected and very easy to defend. It has a garrison of 3,000 men, which, given its natural barriers, it's quite a very good uh, garrison to do. So the city is kind of is on a small island. So the south side opens up into the sea where there's the harbor for all the ships. The western and western side has a few bridges that connect it to the mainland, and that's also fortified by a gate and a small part of the garrison. And the eastern side has a small land bridge that connects it to the main side. And to the north, there's also a lagoon, which makes so it's kind of protected from two sides completely by water. And the passageways on the east and west are quite restricted. So Scipio launches an assault. It's a combined land and sea assault since he's got whatever ships he's had. Fairly successful, but ultimately they get pushed back. Now, the standard custom in the ancient times has been to wait a few days to let your men recover completely from their exertions, maybe build more siege ladders and trenches, whatever, or collect more forces. He does not do that. He attacks the next day, which is already unconventional for this time. But this time, the man's done a lot of homework thanks to the intelligence. He knows that the lagoon, at a certain time of the low tide in the day, it can be with some difficulty, like, soldiers can cross it on foot. But it has to be at the low tide at that time of the day. So he launches his combined assaults again, just as a diversion. 500 men he's already picked cross that lagoon with scaling ladders behind the Carthaginian defenders, and well, they attack the Carthaginian garrison from the rear, and they open the gates to the main Roman army. And what proceeds is pretty much a massacre. And while we do know that he's a man that would later show some shrewd politicking in terms of appeasement to the locals and winning them over. This was also a calculated move to show that he means business and spread terror among the locals. And this was a huge blow to the Carthaginian army. They've lost the capital of the region, and there are established silver mines and farming and every industry that is now completely under Roman control, and a lot of money, arms, and armor that can be used by the Romans. We see this, and immediately after that, some results start coming to fruition in terms of the locals. Several tribes in the area quickly defect to his side of the battle. So he's starting to win more. Hasdrubal, he marches to meet Scipio, and near the city of Baecula on a plateau, he forms up his army in a defensive posture. And Scipio shows his different tactics once again, instead of because Hasdrubal kind of expected the standard Roman practice of heavy infantry center, allied infantry on the flanks, and skirmishers and cavalry on the wings and in the front on the wings respectively. What Scipio has done, he's put his light infantry and skirmishers in the center, directly facing Hasdrubal, and they are throwing javelins, arrows, and just keeping the Punic army focused on him. And in the meanwhile, he's taken all the Roman infantry, split them into two groups. One wing he takes command, and the other he gives to his co-commander Gaius Laelius, who I might add, his family will continue to work very closely with the Scipio for several generations. And he launches a pincer attack. And the Carthaginians never see these pincers marching up the sides of the plateau. And at the Battle of Baecula, of Hasdrubal's 30,000 man army that he came to, two-thirds are lost, killed or captured. He does manage to, unfortunately, escape with 10,000 men and the baggage train, which is where we can see a part of Scipio's only shortcoming, as I would call it, as a general. He did not exploit his victory. And the Roman Senate was quite unhappy with it. I guess they were kind of more terrified of the prospect of significant reinforcements coming to Hannibal's aid. But as we'll see, Hasdrubal will make it to Italy, but recruiting more locals along the way, and would be defeated and killed at the Battle of Metaurus. But that's not really where Scipio gets involved, so we'll leave it at that. Now, what is great over here is a lot of the locals that he captured, right? Like from the mercenary forces. They were like, I think one was a daughter of a very prominent chief of a local his tribe. And the men got her to him as a prize, and he, lets her go to her father with some gifts, and that brings a lot of the locals over to his side even more. So he's augmenting his forces. But I think the biggest coup was the nephew of the Numidian commander Massinissa is captured in the battle.
Mm-hmm.
Scipio, on learning this, he has that man escorted back to Massinissa's camp, under protection, and returned with, no harm done. Now, I think we should just mention that Massinissa is a contender for the throne of Numidia. And this action, plus Scipio's victories at Baecula and taking Carthago Nova and at such speed, will earn this Roman general an immense amount of goodwill that will have, yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, it's foreshadowing to what happens later. But in the background of what's happening in Hispania, basically what you're alluding to is Scipio is not conventional at all by Roman standards. So for people who
Exactly.
don't, yeah, for people who don't know any history of the Roman Republic, for most of it, the Romans are absolutely like cutthroat. The order of the day is if anybody tries to break off of the Roman Republic or is even rebellious at all, they are beaten, they are subjugated beyond any measure of a doubt. Like they are really, it's like a brutal punishment to anybody who's rebellious. So anybody who's an enemy of Rome, the way the Romans deal with it is they strike the fear of God into you. They beat you down, they'll salt some of your agriculture, they'll do whatever they have to, and they'll instill so much fear into you that you won't fight them again for like 2 generations. That's kind of like the norm.
It's Yeah, I think it's also like even for their allies if they look rebellious, because
Oh yeah.
ultimately the Romans have this huge drive that it kind of gets ingrained into them at all levels is the duty to the state.
Hmm.
And this is where like you have a rebellious ally to them, you're failing the state. As you said, they need to brutally send a message.
Yeah, and I
And
think
Scipio is not averse to that. As I said,
no, no,
he
of
the way
course
he
not.
sacked Carthago Nova, but he knows when to play the clemency card for
Hmm.
politics. And I think this is something we would see like Julius Caesar
Yeah, exactly.
masterfully using.
It's very reminiscent of how Julius Caesar came to fight Pompey. It's what we're alluding to is Scipio is known for clemency, as a form of diplomacy, I guess you could say. And
Hmm.
basically, he took a look at the local, as you call them, the different tribes people of Hispania, and he could see, yeah, these are mercenaries, they're sellswords, they don't really hold any allegiance to the Carthaginians, they're just doing whatever they have to do to get by. So if you can win over these locals basically. And in order to do so, he basically kind of just had a policy of clemency. So any of these people that he had conquered, he more or less was lenient towards all of them. I mean, of course, there's going to be instances where he'll be brutal because he's a freaking, he's a general of Rome. But overall, he's known for a lot of clemency. So, just to kind of give an idea, after he captured the city of Carthago Nova, uh, Cartagena, I think is what it's called today, in 209, he famously released all the hostages taken by the Carthaginians from the local tribes. And by doing so, he won a lot of the goodwill of these tribes, like you had said. And they were beginning to see Rome not as like a conquering enemy, but as a potential liberator from the Carthaginians. And, this
True.
mercy.
And
Yeah.
I think I would just add, letting them go back to their families unharmed and with some
Yeah.
small amount of gifts. That's definitely a better way than just say uh, outbidding the Carthaginians for their services. This is kind of winning a bit more goodwill that the money will just not be able to buy.
Yeah. And it's a carrot over the stick, and Rome is notably one to use the stick. And it goes even further than that. Scipio, he was really careful to kind of abide by and respect local customs of these tribespeople and stuff. And he tried to integrate some of the local leaders into the Roman administration that he was controlling at the time. And it fostered a sense of partnership rather than just pure domination, because basically the Roman Empire would come in and they just make Rome where they are. That's kind of a way of saying it. They utterly dominate you. You have to adopt all aspects of their culture and stuff. Well, at least at this time period, it does change over time. This cultural sensitivity, it goes a long way, and it cements, some partnerships, some real allies amongst the Hispanians. And he also shows mercy towards his defeated forces, of his enemies, and that's pretty unusual, I'd say, for Roman commanders. I mean, give or take, like we said, Julius Caesar later in history will famously do this, but it's abnormal. He's an unconventional guy, and people definitely take notice of this, and it's changing the look of Rome during the Second Punic War, and it's going to change some of the tides. Well, I'll just say that much.
But I think also just showing where he can be pragmatic and a bit brutal
Oh yeah.
is the mutiny of Sucro that he handled, which was an internal dispute.
Hmm.
And this, we're not sure exactly when in the year 206 BC it takes place. So this is a mutiny of some Roman soldiers that have been stationed in Spain. And my guess is it happened before the Battle of Ilerda, which we will get to in the next segment of this podcast. But we don't know for sure. Uh, My guess is it was before, because after the Battle of Baecula in 208 BC, beyond some small skirmishing, Scipio and the Carthaginians both do not really engage in any major combat. I think one reason was definitely he did have a big bout of sickness. So this was around 8,000 soldiers stationed in the town of Sucre. So this is like I think this is near, it's where Valencia is. It's in the province of Valencia. And they are quite dissatisfied right now, because they are kind of unhappy that they've been away from their families for many years. They feel they're not getting their fair share of the plunder. They want more pay. And, just that the long marches and exhaustion from the campaign, all of this reaches a simmering point where they want to rebel. And hearing that Scipio Africanus is quite ill, the reports get blown out of proportion that the general is on the deathbed.
Yeah.
He's about to die. Scipio hears about this, and it's quite concerning because this is 8,000 veteran soldiers.
Hmm.
And he sends six of his tribunes to the mutineers' camp at Sucro. And they are basically to talk and you know negotiate a little bit with the rebels, or the mutineers as you want to call them. But their real intention is they need to get the ringleaders' names. That's it. There's not going to be any other mission for these guys. And then after through the talking, which included a lot of drinking on the part of the ringleaders of the soldiers, they get their names. And they say, okay, yeah, come over to the city. We'll give you your demands. We accept it. And as the mutineers come into the city in the morning, they see another 8,000 soldiers who are more loyal to Scipio and have not been in the theater as long, march out in full gear, and they think, okay, these guys are gone for a long training march. They're not, so we have nothing to. And then they're told that Scipio will address them. And they think, okay, we're just going to see a really sickly, weak man. He'll give in. We are all happy. And as these men assemble, instead of seeing like a sickly old man, they see the general come out in full health. He's made his recovery. And at the same time, this men that they saw marching out, that was just a ruse. They had never really left the town on that training march. Instead, you have these 8,000 unarmed mutineers surrounded by a ring of around a similar number of heavily armed legionaries. And Scipio, in his speech, he admonishes them for, rebelling against Rome and the gods, and, going away from their sacred duty and all. And he kind of calls them like, deserters to duty. And this is where I said, like the Roman state had that entire thing that everyone is devoted to the duty to the state. The men surrounding them were all, banging their swords and weapons against their shields. So that noise is quite scary. And these guys are completely, they don't know what to do. And so the ringleaders for, instigating the mutiny, they are all executed. Though, to be fair, Scipio did fulfill quite a lot of their grievances in terms of the pay and everything. But they were forced to once again swear their allegiance to the gods and to the state. And he does gain back a pretty competent fighting force of veteran soldiers who are now quite loyal to him, given the way he handled it. Because if it would have been other commanders, I think Rome would be 8,000 soldiers short. So this is like a way he really knows when to show clemency and when to take a hard-handed approach. So I think this is like one thing I really wanted to speak with about his character with regards to an event that took place. Now, I think let's build up to the Battle of Ilerda, which is the decisive battle for the Spanish theater. So at the the Battle of Ilipa, sorry, completely mixed up the names. So sorry. And Ilipa is the culmination of the last 2 years of inactivity. So instead of ever supplying Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian Senate is pouring a lot of resources and troops into Hispania, which Scipio is pretty much doing a very good job at defeating. Over the last couple of years, all the Carthaginian forces combined under Mago and Gisco, and Scipio also augments his forces mostly with local infantry, and they do go in the spring of 206 BC to like in the year of 206 BC campaigning season. They're on a collision course. The battlefield is near the what we know today as Seville. And in the so what let's just talk a little bit about the numbers that these men are deploying to the battlefield first. Scipio has, according to Polybius, 48,000 soldiers, out of which only 3,000 are cavalry and 45,000 are infantry. And considering the standard formations and his use, I'm pretty sure there would have been a few thousand skirmishers since they play a bit of a role. And it seems like almost an equal number of heavy Roman infantry and light Iberian mercenary infantry. So it's not really a significantly powerful force because we all know the power of the Roman legions. Now, the Carthaginians, on the other hand, have mustered quite a sizable army of almost 75,000 men, out of which 70,000 are just infantry, the rest cavalry, and they have about 32 elephants. So yeah, this is a battle where there was a significant elephant force. And as we alluded to in the previous podcast episode with Hannibal, when battle is to be fought in the days building up, the armies will be around each other's vicinity, skirmishing, trying to just find that little psychological edge or whatever, and then attack when they feel that they are either the strongest or their enemies are the weakest. And yeah, so what happens is both armies are camped on either side of a plateau. They're, I think, they're, I think, about 5 kilometers apart or so. And what will happen is at the start of the day, both armies will just line up for battle, stand there all day, and that's it. Nothing. Both sides will just do this exact same thing for 6 days. Now, it kind of sounds ridiculous to us, but this is kind of dance or psychological play that all generals kept doing, to kind of just see. And for Scipio, in this case, it was actually more of a ruse rather than a actual trying to get any psychological edge. What he wanted the Carthaginian commanders of Gisco and Mago to see. He followed the standard Roman practice, which they are no doubt well versed in terms of formation. In front of the skirmishing line, behind the skirmishing line, the center is held by the heavy Roman infantry. The Spanish mercenaries are flanking them on either side. And on the wings is the Roman cavalry force. And he made sure that these guys could see it very well. So in response, Mago and Gisco, they mirror the formation with their elite Carthaginian and African infantry holding the center, the weaker mercenary units on their flanks, and the cavalry again on the flanks, and the elephants just slightly in front of the cavalry. However, on the seventh day, Scipio has other plans. So he wakes his army up well before dawn. He makes them eat breakfast. He, tells them to get ready so they'll get to use the toilet, whatever. And after that, while his main infantry and cavalry forces are forming up, all the skirmishers are deployed to attack the Carthaginian camp. And this is not really done to cause any damage whatsoever, but just to tell the Carthaginian army, hey, buddies, let's time to wake up. Today's the day of battle. And this is just towards the crack of dawn when the Carthaginians are attacked. And when you have a force of a few thousand skirmishers, they would have naturally thought that this is it. This is the assault. They rush into formation, and it's now become second nature to everybody where they have to align on the field of battle. So they have kept their formation. And as dawn comes and they see the Roman army marching even closer to them this time, so the distance has reduced. They then finally see Scipio has mixed up his formation. The skirmishers have gone to the wings now near the cavalry, and his center core is held by the Iberian light infantry. The Roman infantry are flanking both sides, and these guys are completely confused as to why this doesn't make any sense. The armies are just a couple of kilometers apart. That's it. Or I think slightly less than that, but not more than 2 kilometers. And now for a few hours, Scipio waits. And this is in the heat of the Spanish summer. And the Carthaginians, because of their early morning wake up call from courtesy of Scipio's skirmishers, they've not had breakfast, they've not had water. So this is not really good for the morale of the men. And Scipio waits for a few hours for the sun to, really take its toll on these men standing on the field of battle. His men can handle it better. He's prepared them. And then he orders them to march forward. And then we see something completely different. Instead of like moving at the same pace, the center core of the Spanish infantry are marching at a slower pace against their counterparts, which would be the elite Carthaginian infantry. The Roman infantry blocks on their flanks are moving at a much faster pace. So a gap is developing, and when they are about 800, 900 meters from, or I think about half a mile, if I got the math correct, the Roman infantry units stop, and one side takes a left turn and the other side takes a right turn. They march a bit and then turn to face in from column into line again. And this is within a kilometer of the enemy positions. It's an incredible amount of discipline, which is the fruition of the training that he's instilled into his men over the last 4 years of command. And now the Romans have outflanked the enemy. And in the meantime, his skirmishers are actually routing the elephants, because elephants don't do well against a lot of pointed objects being thrown at you. And this pretty much causes the Carthaginian elephants and cavalry to be a complete no-show, because the elephants, as we will see quite often in many other battles, once they're panicked, the units behind them, God help them. And now that the flanks are secured, the Roman flanks are also closing in. And Scipio's intended target are the Carthaginian mercenary light infantry. And this is where the beauty of his plan is shown, because he's completely removed the threat of the elite Carthaginian infantry from the center. Why? Because if they turn to attack the Romans infantry, not only will the Roman infantry be able to hold their ground, Scipio would then unleash his light infantry to charge forward the Spanish mercenaries. And they're just going to hit the exposed flank of the Carthaginian infantry, which would have had to turn in to support their allies. And if they don't, well, heavy infantry are going to make mincemeat out of light infantry. So, as expected, this battle was a complete disaster for the Carthaginians. And in the post battle pursuit, they kind of fell back to their camp and then ran away, like, in complete terror. But Scipio, unfortunately, this time, you can't even blame him for not taking the immediate pursuit like he did at Baecula, because there was a sudden torrential downpour. Probably the gods had decided that this was enough of a victory for today. And now we get to the main thing of the casualties. Scipio suffered about 7,000 casualties. The Carthaginians, just from the battlefield alone, over 48,000. That's quite a bit of a thing. And
That's an insane loss. Yeah.
yeah, it's 2/3 of a pretty large force, to
Yeah.
say the least. And over the next few weeks, we would actually see that the surviving Iberian and Spanish mercenaries that the Carthaginians had on their side, well, they've deserted. They're like, I'm out. And I think Hasdrubal Gisco and Mago both flee. Mago flees to the Balearic Islands, where he will try to join Hannibal with a small force of a few thousand men. And Gisco, on the other hand, had to surrender with the remaining soldiers, but he managed to escape with a small bodyguard, but that was it. Carthage's presence on the Iberian Peninsula was completely wiped out.
Yeah, because it came down to mop-up operations, town by town, and when the local populace is completely turned over to the Romans, it's so easy to consolidate and just take what was the crown jewel of the Carthaginian Empire.
Indeed, and even if we just ignore, say, Scipio's goodwill tactics or that he had undertaken, the locals, if they're mercenaries, even without the money, there's another thing that they will always back: whoever's likely to win.
Of course.
And the writing's on the wall. So there was really no more support for Carthaginians. And now Hispania is going to be a very integral part of the Roman realm for many centuries to come. And yeah, so this is where he would depart Hispania at the end of the year. In the year 205 BC, Scipio takes over the consulship. And mind you, this is at the age of, if I'm not mistaken, in 205 BC, he would be 31 years old. That's 11 years before the standard norm.
Oh.
His popularity had skyrocketed that even the traditional aristocracy who want to stick to the rules, and especially after a victory like what he achieved at there's no way you could stop him. It's kind of sad that the only men who came up with tactics that could beat Hannibal were going to grind gears. So one of the biggest political opponents at this time for Scipio Africanus was Fabius Maximus.
Yep.
And that's down to the fact that Fabius, as we've seen, is a prudent but cautious commander.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where Scipio appears reckless in comparison. But the key word is appearance, is the appearance. He takes very good calculated risks.
Yep.
And this is actually what really separates, great generals from the mediocre or rubbish ones. Called it. So Scipio does take command of, he gets over Sicily, and he has been preparing for the invasion of North Africa because he believes that's the only way to end the war.
Mm-hmm.
But before the Battle of Ilerda even took place. And this is where he actually sends Gaius Laelius, his very trusted subordinate, to Numidia. That's where you see the power struggle also within Numidia, where you have King Syphax and Massinissa both as kind of like in an internal civil war with each other. And both Carthage and Rome are trying to secure the allegiance of the Numidians for their famed horsemen. And we'll discuss probably more about Massinissa and Syphax in the next episode as the
Hmm.
road converges at Zama. But Scipio, he's kind of being curtailed right now in by the Roman politicians.
Oh yeah.
He is kind of granted the province of Sicily as his pro consulship after his term as consul. So that would be in the year 204 BC. So just a quick thing is after a Roman praetor or consul serves their term in office, they are given a province to govern, with obviously consuls taking a very good province given the station. And he gets Sicily, and he's told that you're not going to get any new reinforcements. You're on your own. But lucky for him, he's so popular that he raises a couple of legions worth of men on his own privately. And these are not just young men who've just heard of him. They are pretty much his veteran soldiers that have followed him.
Hmm.
And this is a trend that we are going to see quite a lot when we go to Roman late Republican history. But he does also get two station legions on Sicily, which to the Senate are trash. I did forget to mention that garrison unit, which was never involved at Cannae and that fled from Cannae. Those men were labeled as traitors and cowards by the Senate and
Hmm.
exiled to Sicily. And even though they helped magnificently in the reconquest of Sicily, right after the Carthaginians and Syracuse's revolt, the Senate never really uh, wanted to do anything with him. It's like, these guys are just horrible. And this is even in spite of a very prominent consul, Marcus Valerius Lavinus, who is the guy that pretty much neutralized Macedonia in the First Macedon War, which is occurring concurrently. He used these legions in the reconquest, and he also petitioned pretty hard to have them reinstated and allowed to return home. And the Senate's like, nope, you guys are not coming back. And these are men who, for no fault of their own, have been in exile for 10 years.
Yeah. Jeez.
But they are granted to Scipio along with whatever forces he can raise on his own. And this is going to be the core of the invasion force that he's going to take to North Africa. Now, why have we focused on Scipio and why have we not mentioned anything of Hannibal? Is the two greatest generals of this war, they're now going to clash at the decisive battle on North African soil. And it just felt right that we need to have a discussion about the rise of both men.
Yeah. And I guess there's something we haven't actually mentioned to the audience. There, maybe the audience is a little bit confused because from the viewpoint of the audience who don't know the history, you have Hannibal running amok in Italy, threatening the very core of the Roman Republic. You have Scipio over here in Hispania, but then he's pushing to go to Africa. Why would he be doing that? Well, it's because Hannibal has basically trapped
You,
himself.
I think we should spend a few minutes on this.
Yeah,
We'll get into the details of how he went in North Africa, like in Italy after Cannae in the next episode.
yeah, of
We'll
course.
elaborate a bit more. But the main thing is Hannibal did not have any political allies in the Carthaginian Senate. That was the
Yeah.
biggest Achilles heel.
And he did not
The
have a real logistical line. He
True.
became because he was depending on his brothers, and his brothers basically failed him. They were the only kind of maybe a lifeline. Maybe he can get supplies through a land route going from Hispania. But as soon as that is no longer going to be a thing, I mean, as we'll see in future episodes, Hannibal even has like this pitiful, maybe the Greeks will help him kind of thing, but he's stuck. He has this enormous force, but he's been sacking and rampaging in Italy, and he's going to lose the ability to continue to do so because of the Fabian strategy. It's completely over
Uh,
time, attritionally wearing him down.
and that's true. He was very unsuccessful in trying to take the port cities. He does manage to get Naples for a bit, but is unable to keep it. And I think the biggest problem also was that the Carthaginian Senate just did not send him
Of
any support
course.
whatsoever.
No, they didn't with
All
his
the
family.
reinforcements, all the reinforcements were going to Hispania, Sicily, Corsica, Sardinia.
Yeah.
Nothing went to Italy.
Hmm.
And again, this is, I think, probably maybe because Hispania, from a monetary perspective, was very lucrative
Of
to
course.
keep possession of. And the faction that controlled the Carthaginian Senate just hated the Barca family.
Yeah, in general, like people think that would sound silly. They literally just hated the Barca family, and they were willing to pretty much lose the war over it. And when you look at it from Scipio's point of view, why would I go challenge this immense great commander on his own terms? Because he's like Yamamoto looking for a decisive battle out there when I can just go cut the head of the snake. I can go after Carthage itself in North Africa. And you've defeated both at the same time because if you go after North Africa, they're not going to be able to send anything to help poor old Hannibal. He's stuck. He's on his own.
Actually, he did correctly guess that they will call him back, but here's the
Yeah.
problem. The Fabian strategy that had been adopted quite successfully after Cannae
Hmm.
has worn down Hannibal's men.
Oh yeah.
Granted, most of it are his Gallic troops, which are obviously cannon fodder,
Yeah, they're
but
not
even
going
his
in.
wanted, and they will obviously not be taken to, not at least not in great numbers, to North Africa, but even his veterans, that elite wanted veteran army that has seen battle for 20, 25 years with not only Hannibal but his father, they've also no doubt taken a lot of casualties as well.
Hmm.
Not many of them came from Africa to start off, sorry, from the Alps to start off with. And 15, 16 years is a long time to not go down in strength without
Yeah.
reinforcements.
But I
And
guess
so this whittling down plus lack of logistics, his forces weakened. And Scipio rightly reasoned that they'll call for him to come back. And if not, as he said, he'll cut off the head of the snake, or that much wanted army is off Italian soil.
yep. And I guess stating that we should leave the rest for the next episode. But I just want to remind everybody that if you want to further support the channel, you can please go check out well, if you're not listening to this on YouTube, probably you're listening to this on a podcast platform, mind you. You can go over to the YouTube channel and you can, if you want to, if you have if you could spare a bit of change, let's say, you can join my YouTube membership or you can join the Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War channel. And if you join either, you get access to the exclusive podcast. Like I keep saying, there's I think about 25 episodes at this point. The last episode I put out was me going over the century of humiliation that involves China and how it formed the People's Republic of China we see today. So it's a combination of me going through the history from 1830 to 1949, then talking about Cold War era China, but also modern day, particularly speeches made by Xi Jinping right now, because he always brings up the century of humiliation. It's actually at the core of a lot of the narrative of the People's Republic. So it's a more interesting episode, geopolitics with history. So I'm trying to dabble into new things there. Of course, if you decide to join up, you also get early access to all the content I make. And as of today, I have a brand new episode that's going to be premiering on YouTube. It is nothing like I have ever done before. I made an episode dedicated to a comedic event, which was Churchill's visit to the White House in 1941 over Christmas time with FDR.
I, I'll just admit, I saw that. I loved it.
Have you already watched it? Because it came out like this morning, I think.
So I'm on the YouTube membership, so it did have that early access.
Okay. And I know some people might grumble at this. I wanted to flirt with something. So I've recently gotten acquainted with a lot of new AI technology. So what I did was I used a new type of technology that turns old photos into video to try and give some more umph into these weird pictures that emerged of Churchill getting drunk with FDR. Because, of course, there's no video footage of this. And I also used AI to try and have FDR and Churchill speak in their own voice. It's a little cringy. It's not perfect by any means, but I thought it would make it more comedic. And the episode is a comedy. It's real history, but it is a comedy. And basically, the episode covers Churchill getting drunk with FDR, appearing nude in front of FDR, and actually, it was two occasions. Churchill fighting a shark off, which is definitely an exaggerated account, and Churchill nearly killing himself and the people in his airplane as he was coming back to Britain. And it's a very funny episode, and it's supposed to be funny. So I really hope that people want like a little levity. It's a great episode. It's gonna come out way like maybe a month from now. I wanted to put it up in early access because I want to hear from my YouTube members and my Patreon members if it's too cringy, where to change the memes and stuff, because I went overboard on this one. I mean, I'm using Mr. Leahy from Trailer Park Boys in like five scenes. It's overdone. But anyways, that's up there. There's a lot of other unlisted content on the YouTube membership, including 4 or 5 episodes in something that I call back in the day, it was called the Speak Easy podcast. It was a failed venture I did with just a bunch of friends where we debated history, but also stupid things like anime and video games. And it's ridiculous. It's like, what if Godzilla actually attacked 1947 Tokyo kind of stuff? So it's just comedy and stupidity. You can watch that too. And another thing I wanted to bring up, as we did at the beginning of this episode, this podcast is going to be called Echoes of War. We're going to be covering any type of history that we're capable of covering. So obviously, Gaurav has interests that I couldn't possibly know about. I have interests he couldn't possibly know about. But for you audience members, if you're listening to this on a podcast platform, you have no ability to comment. They haven't really built it into anything. I think maybe on Podbean you can comment. If you listen there, please try to do so. I would love to see if that's a thing. But the only way to really let us know what you want to hear about, you have to go over to my YouTube channel and just comment on my videos or go into any of the polls I put up. I'm putting up a lot lately. Or I guess you could email me. Just go over to my YouTube channel. There's an email address there to, just say what you want to hear about. But to kind of give you an idea, both of us, I know, we're World War One enthusiasts, World War Two enthusiasts. I think Gaurav is a lot better at Napoleonic era war stuff than me. I'm not good with the European wars of like the 18th, 19th century and such. Anything that involves the history of Asia, I'm pretty good at. So if you want stuff on like the French colonization of, French Indochina, I know that pretty well. The Philippines, I know pretty well. Japan, of course, I have a background in Japanese history. China, duh, I do a whole podcast on China. Um,
That would be embarrassing if you did not.
yeah, seriously, everything I do is Chinese history right now. It's insane. I know, of course, I'm Canadian. I know a lot about the French Indian War. If anybody's interested in that, that's a hard one to pitch, by the way. I took every single American history class you can take. I took every Latin American history class you can take in university. So pre-colonization and post-colonization. So the revolutions of, Colombia, Mexico, all that I know. The Incan Empire, Aztec Empire, Mayans, all that. I'm pretty good with that history. God, Aboriginal history. I work in Aboriginal Reserve with Mohawks. I could touch upon the wars of the Ongwe Ongwe, Algonquin Wars and such. I could touch upon that. I don't know if anyone would be too interested in that. I'm trying to think. There's a lot of stuff ancient in the ancient world, ancient Greece, anything ancient Roman. I'm not too bad at. Gaurav, can you throw some ideas?
Oh, you mentioned ancient Greece and ancient Rome, which I've
Yeah.
studied a fair bit,
Mhm.
just out of pure passion.
Mhm.
And now I've been reading way too much about it. Uh, Definitely, I could also look at the Middle Ages.
Yeah, that's my weakest
So,
point. I'm not good at Middle Age history.
yeah, because I've actually been quite interested in the Middle Age fights that involve, like, say, the Holy Roman Empire, Hundred Years' War, the rise of the Kingdom of England, and actually trying to get into the Viking era right now.
Oh, you know what? I I got really heavily invested in Dan Carlin's recent episodes covering what we would call the era of the Vikings, like the Great Raids, before and after, like, from Charlemagne to the end of the Viking era, as we would call it. I really do love that time period. I'm not a specialist. Another thing I'm going to do for this podcast, I don't think I mentioned this to Gaurav yet. I'm compiling a list of all the history YouTubers that I'm friends with, some that I've never talked to, but we kind of brush shoulders on Twitter and stuff. And I'll eventually do some episodes once we have Echoes of War running, where we'll invite them on and both of us will kind of interview them, on a subject. For example, Nitin from Flashpoint History, he's, I'd say, very good with the history of Spain and Portugal, the Reconquista period and all that. That's kind of his stick right now. He could definitely talk our ear offs, about all of that. Or I could bring on Cody from Alternate History Hub. God, I'm sure he has a lot of weird stuff he could talk about. And there's all sorts of others. I've really networked with a lot of guys now working with KNG, and of course, there's guys at KNG that we can bring on, and they can just, talk about certain histories that we don't know well. I do love learning through a podcast. I like being kind of like the Joe Rogan of history, so to say. But stating all of that, stay tuned because I'm heavily invested in this little series. This is probably one of the more interesting podcasts I've done in a long time, and I want to do the third part right away because I love the Battle of Zama and the end this all. It's really fun. So stay tuned. We're going to be finishing this off soon.